Hey fam, it's Romania Black. I took a break after episode 33, which was a smart thing to do. I took a legit week off. I usually record ahead, and I was like, no, I need to take some time off. But it started to get to the point where I was like, well, I'm not going to be able to keep watching the series if I don't get back to it. So I'm going to be real with y'all. I've pre-wrote how I want to handle the intro section of this before diving into the episode, because I'm in a much better place than I was last week. Last week was rough. Last week was not a fun time to be Romania Black watching a series. So I'm going to get through these comments, and I'm going to try to be as minimalist as possible, and then I have something wrote up to respond, because otherwise I don't think I'll get through it without crying. Legitimately. And I'm in a good place. I'm in a good mood tonight. So I was like, tonight's the night. I'm in a good mood. We're going to just dive back into episode 34, because it's either dive back in or I just stop watching the series. And I feel like I've invested too much into the good of this series to stop watching because of the one bad thing. Right? But let's dive into it. So as I'm recording this, there's one comment for episode 29, which is really cool, which is from Akara Kiko. That says, regarding the episode title, episode 29, the original Japanese word is translated as azure is riri iro. Ruri is ruri iro. Ruri means lapis lazuli, and iro means color. So it's literally lapis lazuli color. The etymology of the word azure is lapis lazuli, so the translation's not wrong. Ruri is a combination of the two character names. In kanji, Ruri is, and the other one is the kanji of ruka. And the other character is the second kanji of jury. So I like that. I really love that comment, because it's pointing out that episode 29's title is not only talking about the azure sky, but it's also talking about the etymology of the two names of Ruka and Jury coming together to create the title. Genius! Love it! Episode 29 is probably one of my favorite episodes in the entire series, so I'm all about it. But the rest of these comments are going to be about episode 30 on YouTube and 31 on Patreon, and that's about where I'm at in recording. So unfortunately, we'll probably have weeks of comments related to episodes 32 and 33, and we'll just have to deal with those as we come. But in the meantime, Jer Jr. 3951 for episode 30 says, Akio in the past compared people to the stars, saying the older they get, the less bright and shining they are. Totally not weird for him to say that. But it is also a straight up lie. Stars tend to be the brightest just before their end, but he is not questioned because he's surrounded by children, which this especially makes me mad because I'm a lover of astronomy since birth. Yes, of course. It's very frustrating when an adult figure around you is lying to your face. And it's frustrating when you know the lie, but it's even more frustrating when someone that doesn't realize it's a lie believes that person, and you're like, but they're lying. And then it's just very frustrating. They said, my current interpretation about the Shadow Girl sequence is that Utena is the girl who does not wear the shoes, which would go to the barefoot girl thing, but keeps holding on to this male figure or male ideal, like the prince, where others personally involve themselves with guys instead of holding on to the ideal. In both cases, it's essentially sharing the same fixation. Yeah, this fixation on something that sadly in reality doesn't exist, right? So then Snow Dazed kind of taps onto that, saying for episode 30, the red shoes taps onto that. Look what I did! Saying the red shoes is a Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale. Fun, considering that your mentions of the Little Mermaid were there, in which a girl puts on red shoes to go dancing, and the shoes take her over. She can't stop dancing no matter how badly she wants to. Depending on the version, she either dances to death, or she has to beg someone to amputate her feet for her. Getting off the sidelines in order to feel liberated and joining in the fun is well and good, but some temptations that look fun are dangerous, and some situations aren't so easy to back out of once you've realized you've made a mistake. AKA episode 33. But we've talked about that already, right? We've talked about that. So I thought that was very fitting. I think you could tie the red shoes to both Utena and Anthe, which I have things to say about Anthe, but we'll get to them. I'm frustrated with Anthe as of this episode. HBanana7 says for episode 31, the only statue I recognized in the episode was all the animals, based on a children's story of rejected livestock working together. No idea why. I don't know if that was intending to be a hint, but I would love if all of the duelists that have been slighted by Akio and used by him and abused by him, if they all got together just to hoist him up and throw him off a cliff. That would be amazing. That'd be great. I would love that. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but that'd be wonderful. El Freya says for episode 31, her brother was lying to her the whole time. Well, episode 32, we find out he's lying about lying, regardless of them not being blood, which they are. How he could never have told her that, keeping her in the dark, I think it's because it makes him feel good and it gives him power. And that is so gross. Yes, I agree that Toga is all about power. He wants power even at the sake of screwing over his own flesh and blood. Then he keeps joking with her to rub it in even more. What will happen to Toga now? I hope he gets some karma for his ways with what he's doing with all these middle schoolers and Nanami. I definitely think Toga is going to get his just desserts because I think Akio is going to screw him over in the end because Akio is an asshole and that's just how he works. So I think Toga believes he's in this false state of power, but he's going to get worked over by the system. And then it's going to be like, what are you going to do now? So I don't know how that's going to work, but I hope Toga gets karma because Toga's actually a terrible person. And I kept holding out for him to realize the errors of his ways, but he just doubles down instead. And it's like, shit, no. El Freya also says, it was a bit silly to see Akio rush in to mansplain the rules to Nanami. We can't have our middle schoolers sleeping in unassigned rooms. Meanwhile, Saionji is sleeping in Wakaba's rooms for weeks, and that's just fine. I guess the rules don't apply to men, including Akio. You could definitely look at it like that. There's a part of me that wanted to say, but Saionji snuck away and was secretly staying in Wataba's room, so it's not like Akio knew. But then Mikage just ghosted over and saw him, so who's to say that Akio didn't know and was totally fine with it? So yeah, it's just like, there is a double standard. It's like, who knows what is kind of a mystery in this show. And then sometimes I can't help but think that Anthy just really likes to shake the hornet's nest. Maybe it's just Akio directing her, but she always loves to set things in motion by the banana peel or ever so casually dropping some information to people. Anthy frustrates me a lot at this point, and she is both a victim and a perpetrator in a way, and it is very frustrating, and I want to feel bad for her, but I also am mad at her at the same time, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we get past Oliver Jajado's comments. Oliver Jajado says for episode 31, I love the symbolism of Utena doing a handstand, followed by Anthy filming and holding the microphone for her. Utena is the lead actor. Hey, be nice. My dogs are being so mean. Utena is the lead actor in this whole charade of a play, and everything is happening right in front of her eyes. Yet her perspective is literally turned upside down, so she's unable to see the painful truth. Again, I'm going to talk about Anthy with all of this when we get to it. And yeah, I think it's obvious that Anthy went late and lost the rock, paper, scissors on purpose so that Akio wouldn't get any ideas to visit Utena or Nanami during the night, which we're going to talk about here in a second with episode 33. So just I'm holding it in. I'm holding it in. But they said Ikuhara's commentary for episode 31, her tragedy. There was once a girl who said, when I grow up, I'm going to marry daddy. I wonder who she actually ended up marrying. Blood relationships are the only relationships we have where people want us exactly as we are. To a child, the daddy who affirms everything about her is her prince and the world itself. So the words, when I grow up, I'm going to marry daddy, means the same thing as I'm going to make the whole world mine. However, in the process of becoming an adult, there comes a moment for each of us when we're rejected by that world or that prince. The person that we love with dumps us, the school we wanted to go to so badly doesn't let us in, the career we were working for doesn't pan out. Everyone has a moment like that, and that's okay. There's no such thing as something that mustn't be lost. Everyone has the freedom to love something or someone. We are free, and we mustn't forget that. And that kind of ties in. Those words meant a lot to me with that commentary. And again, I'm going to try not to get emotional, so I've wrote this all down. But this idea from that of family considering us special could definitely apply to Anthy and Nanami, sure. And the idea of comfort and sanctuary when the rest of the world is cruel to us, which makes when that family betrays them and does something terrible all the worse of a situation. And then you have Utena last episode saying that she doesn't have any siblings, so she doesn't know what it's like to have that comfort or that want, right? Whereas, I mean, Juri's in the same boat, but you have Miki, you have Nanami, you have Anthy, who all have a sibling who has essentially in some way or another been kind of betrayed by them, right? So as for the freedom message, it would be nice if Nanami, Utena, and Anthy could hear that message, you know? People who are abused often don't realize they have a choice to leave. And that's the big thing with Anthy, is Anthy not realizing, just like Utena didn't realize and Nanami doesn't realize, they can go. They have freedom. They don't have to stay in that relationship if they don't want to. They have the choice to leave, and they forget that. And that's a common theme in abusive relationships, is that you forget you have that choice in the narrative. So yeah, last week was rough. I understand why people would maybe think episodes 31 through 33 are masterful and masterpieces in storytelling and cinema. And I don't disagree with you. I do agree in a lot of ways. It's highly effective, but I don't know. It feels gross to me when people say that, because it feels like it makes SA art or something to be in awe over, when it is something that happens in real life and has real consequences and is grotesque and ugly. And I hate the concept that an event essentially equivalent to my own rape could be compared to amazing storytelling. I guess if I had someone in my life that was brutally murdered, I would probably think the same thing about true crime shows. Or anything that brings this curious observation of a horrific matter to masses who haven't experienced it. It's like when someone was in a war and they get out and they no longer want to hold a gun or see a war movie. That's kind of where I'm at with it. So my incident happened over a decade ago, and this last week has made me realize I don't need to watch overt SA anytime soon. I've watched 3 series back to back on this channel that have involved a very heavy, drawn out SA incident or incidents, 2 of which have been with female victims. And I can handle a one-shot romance where SA might be approached or hinted at, but usually in those series, communication happens immediately because the story is so short, or they are BL where I can personally disassociate from them, or they are stories I'm not invested in, and thus I can toss and move on rather quickly. But this, I have been invested for 8 months so far in this story and with these characters, and I realized, I know some people need exposure therapy. I don't. Instead, it kind of has the opposite effect on me. I'm sure there are people in the comments, there were people in Berserk's comments that were like, oh, this story helped me realize this about myself and get through it, and that's great. If it helped you do that, amazing, but I am not you, and that is not my experience. And so it just has the opposite effect on me personally. But in relation to the story, enough about that. I'm mad because I had faith in Utena as a character, and the show made me watch her fall, and I don't know how she can regain her foothold from here, especially over Akio. And then I'm even more mad at Anthe, because while Anthe is a victim and I feel for her, and I felt for her this entire series, she watched Utena tell her that if she needed help, she would be there. But then Anthe willingly, knowing that Utena was going to need help, did nothing. And if maybe she is bound by this contract with Akio that she can't do anything. Maybe she can't do anything. Maybe her being the Rose Bride prevents her from doing a damn thing. But that's probably the worst part. It makes her appear in this moment. We don't know exactly what the Rose Bride is capable or not capable of doing. People say she has no free will, but we've seen she has free will. So we don't know the exact specifics at this point in time because no one's come out and directly said the Rose Bride. They've said she can't, but then she proves them wrong. So it's like until we know exactly what Akio has over her, she is seemingly complicit in letting this happen to Utena. And then it's like, I'm supposed to root for them as a couple? I get that she may not have realized that she has a choice, kind of like the whole thing with abuse. She may not realize she has a choice to leave or to speak up, but it's frustrating. And it shows that the creator of this series, I don't know if any of them had any experience with sexual assault, because if you're someone that has experienced SA personally, the last thing you want is for someone else to experience it as well. And so when people were like, with episode 31, they're like, oh, well, Anthe let herself lose at rock, paper, scissors, so Nanami or Utena didn't have to sleep with Akio. And I'm like, well, what difference did it make? Because an episode later, we had all of that happen with Nanami. She ended up letting Nanami be manipulated by Akio and Toga an episode later. And then she let Utena get assaulted by Akio the next day. So what was the point of stalling with the rock, paper, scissors if she wasn't going to take action and it was going to happen anyway? And sure, Anthe may not have had a way of doing anything, but I feel angry that the show needed to let us know that better. And if Anthe had the means and willingly chose not to help, then why am I rooting for her and Utena? I mean, I'm very negative about it at this point because it has deeply affected me, but I can only hope this series gives me that reason and that it's not ruining the series for me. Because I really don't know if I was going to be able to move on from episode 33, and I'm giving it a chance, but I'm going to try to be open-minded. I'm going to try and see. I want to give Anthe the benefit of the doubt, but she has pissed me off so much in this last episode by just not doing anything and letting it happen. And when Utena told her she'd be there for her if she knew what was going on, I will give Utena a slight pass in that regard because Utena doesn't know that Akio is assaulting Anthe. She doesn't. She is blissfully unaware, which is a problem. And Nanami pretty much almost tells her what's going on, but Nanami doesn't come out and say it either. So, but Anthe does know what's going on and has been a part of it. And that's what pisses me off. But we'll see. Also, fuck Akio. And honestly, fuck Toga too. I'm like, honestly, both of them can just go. I'm so done with them. And we still have, 6 episodes left? 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39 in a movie! 6 episodes in a movie, so... And I don't even want to know about that movie. I don't want to know a damn thing. So... I don't know. Anyway, I needed to get that out of my system. I feel better for it. I'm going to probably read some comments for episodes 32 and 33 that piss me off. And I'm hoping the mods will not let me read those. Knowing what I've just said. But anyway, I don't know what to expect. I have this horrible feeling in my stomach. This horrible sourness in my stomach because I'm like, where does Utena go to from here? Where do you go to? I mean, I know where I went to from here, but it was a dark place. So anyway, see? Oh, damn it. Okay. I made it through. We can do it. It'll be fine. We're just going to watch this episode and see what happens. So I appreciate you all sticking with me. Last week was hard, but we're going to power through, right? So we're going to start episode 34 of Revolutionary Girl Utena. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Refresh my coffee at this point because Wyberkin and I have been having some fun before starting this discussion, going back to episode 13. Because the moment that we were getting some of this stuff in this episode, I was like, oh, we need to go back to episode 13 and I need to rewatch the segments between Akio and the prince, because I feel like on the one hand there are some things that they're saying and it's very supernatural, it's very otherworldly, it's very alien, it's very metaphorical, but then there are other parts of me that I'm like, is that literally what it is, or are we missing details? And I feel like you can't entirely rely upon the narrative at this point to be telling all of the truth, because one, we know that Utena's memory is not reliable. She's been remembering something a little bit different the entire time, and we find out in this episode was a little different than what she originally was remembering. So it's like, do we trust the memory within the memory entirely, or are there parts that are not piecing together? I feel like there's another part that is missing, especially in relation to Akio. I feel like there is a component that is missing from the story that is going to connect all this together. And the part that I think is missing is concerning Akio. And once that revelation is made by Utena, then she's going to be like, oh, wait, you're an asshole. Why am I near you? But we're going to go through this. So I went back through episode 13. Lots of fun times in that recap episode. Talking about, from the start, saying if the eggshell is not broken, the chick will die without being born. And that ties to Akio. Akio just went to the castle where the prince is. Just walked right up. Just went there. That's been the whole struggle this entire series. And Akio just went there. You know, like you do. and said, you know, you've not awoken and it's unable to break the egg. You've not awoken, you're unable to break the eggshell. And then there was this line that Toga kept listening to: if the eggshell's not broken, the chick will die without being born. So, I mean, I've got something in my eye, so you have to excuse me. There is something I feel like it's one of those things like, you've not awoken, your power has not been able to break the eggshell. We've had this whole thing with Nanami and the idea of the eggshell relating to, you know, women, talking about their periods and reproductive parts and all of this. And it's like, is the prince's masculinity and power allowing him to break the eggshell? Are we referring that to his sexual nature of being able to penetrate into the hearts of these women, however you want to sexually say that? Are we saying it's along those lines, or is it just something more, you know, supernatural? Is it just the idea that Akio, he's visited the castle with the prince, and the prince has not awoken? There's part of me that believes that the prince that talked to Utena did become the end of the world, but then there's a part of that doesn't make sense. And so we're going to talk through it. There's a part of me that wants to believe that the prince and Akio have separated into two different beings, but then there's another part of me that's like, is this story entirely true? What about Anthe and all of this? What are we missing? It feels like there's a detail missing. It feels like there's a puzzle piece that is intentionally being left out of the equation, intentionally, by Akio, that we don't know yet, right? Because Akio is supposedly this fallen angel, which, if you told me the prince fell into darkness and became Akio, I have some issues with that for reasons, but we'll get to them. But anyway, the power of Dios itself. We've established, though, but Dios is the prince. Anthe called the prince Dios. She called him that the power of the prince is literally Dios. So is the prince just the power of Dios that's in the castle, and without Dios, it becomes Akio? I mean, that would kind of fit the fallen, you know, Lucifer fallen from heaven's metaphor, I guess. Again, we're going to talk about it later on. But the idea is that a lot of these duelists have had the power of the miracle, or the idea of the miracle, possess them. Instead of attaining the power of miracles, they've just been possessed by the temptation of them, right? And Utena kind of seems like she's been the sort of like righteous above that character, right? And so far she had faced 7 duels by episode 13. So she had the friendship duel, which was against Saionji, the choice duel, which was against Saionji, and both of those kind of tie to the idea of her being friends with Anthe and choosing to protect Anthe, which we saw in the flashback in this episode. And then she had reason, love, adoration, conviction, and self, which you could argue have been kind of going through the motions throughout this whole series, especially leading up to Utena with Akio in this. And then there was another duel talked about, the Duel of Revolution, which, if the Duel of Revolution is going to be the last duel, is it going to be against Akio? I think it will be. I think it'll be Utena versus Akio is the Duel of Revolution to get the power of Dios and to save Anthe. Maybe. I don't know. But anyway, so Utena was injured. They made a point of saying that Akio said Utena was injured, but she still protected the Rose Bride, which is why Dios has placed his hopes on her, which makes much more sense now with the flashback that we've got. We'll go talk about it. But it must have brought back nostalgia. And then we saw an image of Utena versus Toga, which to me could symbolize, was the nostalgia. For me, it's like, was the nostalgia of Utena versus Toga that Anthe could relate to? Was it Anthe envisioning Dios fighting against all the monsters to save the princesses, and that's what's nostalgic? Or was it Dios versus Akio? I thought for the longest time that Akio imprisoned the prince in the castle and took Anthe as the Rose Bride for his own. That's what I thought it was. And maybe that's the case and the play just wasn't completely telling the whole story. We'll talk about it as we go through it. But he says, I imagine even the Rose Bride was slightly moved. Yeah, I think slightly moved is a weak way of saying it. I think that's a little bit of an understatement. And then saying the young always seek the end of the world, which in hindsight is a very dark and gross phrase, and I hate it, but the end of the world being tied to darkness. Darkness, immorality, power without morals. That's pretty much Akio in this, which we'll talk about. And then Akio said he was looking forward to the freeing of Dios. But he also said that Utena the power of Dios began unsealing with that second battle with Sionji, and it could herald the rebirth of the power of Dios. That Utena was critical to the rebirth of this power. That Utena was going to possibly free Dios from the castle. And we're going to talk about why that is with the flashback here in this. Now, what Toga has to do with all this, Toga's still a mystery to us. We don't know. Toga was in episode 13 a lot, so... I will say this before we get into this. I'm kind of glad we don't do the duels anymore. I know it's so iconic to have the staircase, and it's so iconic to have the ride up in the elevator and all of that, but we've done this series of duels 3 times. Like, we had the first go-round till episode 13, then we had the Mikage arc, and then we had the sex car arc. So I'm kind of glad to be done with the duels for now. We're probably not fully done with the duels. We still have the Revolution duel. We're not fully done with them, but I'm glad to not be doing them right now and instead doing more character work. This episode definitely felt like a setup episode, which was kind of needed after last week, but it also raises a lot of questions, and it also frustrates me. So, as I get into my frustrations, I want you all to know, please understand, I am coming from this as someone who has not seen the full series. I feel like I get so many comments, and the mods have to flag them all the time, but I get so many comments, and when I go back and look at them after I finish the series, they'll be like, you don't understand, this is going to happen in the movie, and this is going to happen in this, and why can't you see this? Because I'm watching it for the first time, and these are just my reactions. When I go back and get through the whole series, I will probably, just like with episode 13, go back and go, oh, that all makes sense. But I think some people forget what it's like to watch a show for the first time and to not understand everything. Because once you know, and you can't go back to not knowing. So we'll see. We'll see where we go. Maybe y'all don't think that, but just be patient with me. So we start out, I think it's interesting that we have the telescope looking at the Dick Tower. It almost feels like there's someone else looking in at Akio and them, which is curious. It's like we, the audience, are peeking through a telescope into the Dick Tower itself, and we see Anthony's glasses on the floor. So Akio talks about, I'm going to put this out to the side, about discovering a comet. That he discovered a comet earlier, and I'm like, oh, weren't you going to name that after your fiance? We seem to have forgotten about her. And then we see Akio with, the shirt unbuttoned. It's new. Says no one else knows about it yet. And then we see Anthe, and then like the hair is mussed, there's sweat, like they clearly have been, having sexual intimacy. And then there's glasses with like, we presume it could be orange juice, could be Tang, could be whiskey. But I won't tell anyone else about it. I won't even name it. It's amazing. The feeling of discovering a new heavenly body. You feel as though it makes it your property. So he talks about this new comet that he's going to covet as his own because it makes it his property if no one knows. I mean, that's slimy in itself. Also, I'm just going to say in the reaction, I really freaked out because for a second I didn't realize that Anthe was turned facing the other way, and I thought she was giving Akio a blowjob as he was talking about this, and I'm sure it was meant to look like that, and it freaked me out, and I was like, oh, hell no. But, hell, it could be intentionally to do that. But he's like, I feel as though not talking about it and not letting people know about it makes it something that you own. Which the thing about that is, that's a lie. You don't just own a comet because you don't tell people about it. It's like if the tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound? Yes, it makes a sound. It just does, but you don't get to own that. Yeah. And then Anthe, of course, doesn't say anything, but what's in the heavens is in the heavens. It belongs to no one. And then he sits there looking. It belongs to no one. And then he stands up and his hair looks lighter there. And she looks back to him, and he looks back to her, and then she says, good night. And he says, must you still torment me? That's so weird, because she ignores him, she ignores and is silent, and just takes it. She takes his assault, and then he says, why? Or must you still torment me? Which I'm like, I don't quite understand, because it's just, and I know some of you have seen the whole series and you can know because you have the whole context of the whole series, but it's like, I don't know how I feel about the fact that because she's nice to you, that's tormenting you. I'm like, because she gives in to you and your assault, she's the problem. I'm like, if that is abusive behavior and it's intending to be abusive behavior and he's trying to guilt trip her by making it seem like it's her fault when he's the perpetrator, then I get it. Then I get that that's the idea and that's the reasoning behind it. But there's literally no other excuse other than he's just trying to pin this on her when he's the assailant and it's his fault, because it's not her fault she's listening to you. But that is abusive behavior. It's like abuser 101. But then I don't understand why she smiles. It's like, just stop it. And then she says, I'm going to become a prince. And we get the dream, yeah. So the Rose Prince. The Rose Seal is what this episode is called. So I am frustrated with this series because they just go back to school and Utena has sex with Akio and acts like nothing's happened. And I get that because I can relate to Utena in that regard. But the whole time after my own experience, even if I didn't tell people about it or didn't show it on the outside, it was on my mind 24/7, right? And there were feelings of guilt and disgust and confusion and uncertainty and questioning myself. The fact that Utena just completely disassociates and blocks it from her mind, you could argue that that's a trauma response, but I just feel, as somebody that went through that experience, having her have no reflection and having her have no, like, communicating to us, the audience, having no internal monologue, having no thoughts about that, not even flashbacks back to that moment, having no recollection of it, it just feels like a disservice, and it feels almost like it normalizes it, honestly, which I feel like is the wrong thing to do. And so again, you can tell when a creator has not had these experiences, because I'm like, if you had, you'd probably go back to that and reconnect about it. Maybe, possibly, of all things you could have reconnected with and done in this episode, you didn't go back and reevaluate that. We're just going to pretend like it didn't happen. Which I know her memories are bad, and if you tell me that her memories are bad because that's her trauma response, fine. But at some point, like, for us, the audience, if you're going to make it fiction, then you have the artistic license to make her reflect, make her internally monologue, make her think about it, make her, why does she let Akio back in? Why does she not tell anybody? And if she's not telling anybody because she's scared, you as the animators and the creators need to show us that. But for her just to ignore it, or for us, the audience, to forget that it even happened, it's like, unless you're going to explain that that's the time loop, but it's not the time loop because Akio brings it up again and points it out that they've already had sex, and he brings it up and she doesn't say anything. It just feels like she should do something. And to not have her do anything or have any response feels like a disservice to the act. There. I don't know. And maybe she will have that response later. Maybe it'll build up and she'll finally, let it all out. But I kept wanting her to have a reaction and for her to just sit on the couch next to Akio. I'm sorry. But if you had that experience, and granted, I will give the show this. She doesn't seem enamored with him, but I'm like, girl, for her not to say anything and for her not to show the audience how she feels or to see any sign of her being uncomfortable like she was last episode, it almost normalizes it. And it's really upsetting, honestly. So I don't know what to make about that. And so then they talk about expanding the drama club, which I do love, that the Shadow Girls are the drama club. I love that. And they're like, people will want to join just to be with you. And she's like, well, it almost looked like her suit was bigger than usual. So we get to see the Shadow Girls, but we don't get to see the Shadow Girls' faces. I do love that. I love that the Shadow Girls are not shown to us. We don't get to see what they look like. We just see the back of their heads that we've always seen. Love. They're like, we're never wrong about these things. Never. And they even shake like the Shadow Girls. And she's like, I can't act in a play. And they're like, well, you are in a play within a play. Are you sure about that? Which is, when Utena says she has no acting ability at all, I'm like, but aren't you acting now and performing being okay after being assaulted by this man? Aren't you performing that? Isn't that performative in itself? I'm like, oh, that isn't important. All you have to do is stand on stage and they'll be throwing flowers at you and a star will be born. All you have to do is stand there. And so I like they do the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil to come see one of their plays. And the way that they do the arm thing, it makes them look like witches, which is tied to witches in this episode. It'll bring a tear to your eye. I'm like, well, so far the series has brought tears to my eyes, so I don't think this play was going to do that for me. Interesting. And then Tina's like, what did I see? And then they leave her the little slip in there saying, the Kashira players present the tale of the rose. And of course it's number 3. Meaning that they've given one to Akio and to Utena. I like that the guys on the volleyball team were like, hey, come play with us. Make sure you're there. And Wakaba's like, well, it's tough being popular, so have you chosen one yet? So, interestingly enough, the pictures to choose from are all of, there's one of Akio, there's one of Choo-Choo, there's Nanami in the grass, there's another one of Nanami in the cowbell, there's Utena, there's Juri, there's ones of Wakaba and Choo-Choo and Saionji. They're all just, and Kozu, they're all just random pictures. I don't know why they are there. She's like, mark the ones that you like. And I'll get someone in the photo club to make copies. But she says there aren't any of Himamiya. So I'm glad that Utena hasn't forgotten about her. And they say, well, Himamiya is not very sociable. She doesn't participate in school events. And then we see her sitting by herself with Choo-Choo. I'm like, is Choo-Choo the spirit of Dios? Is he the prince? Is he trapped in Choo-Choo and that's why he keeps her company? Again, I feel like we're missing something. And she's like, since when have we had a drama club? So then we have, in front of the planetarium, we have Anthe and Utena wants a picture of them together. And so, of course, he has like a very 90s camera. A very 90s camera on the tripod. And he's like, why do you want a keepsake photo? And she's like, oh, no reason, just my friends. But then what's so frustrating is, again, Utena asks Akio to get in the picture. And I'm like, girl, why are you asking him to get in the picture? Like, why would you do that? Like, again, I feel like, I'm like, if the creators had someone who had been through that experience on their writing team, then they would know the last thing that person would truly want, even if her feelings from episode 33, as you portrayed them, are true, she would not ask Akio to get in the picture. And I don't want to hear in the comments people being like, well, actually, I'm like, no, I don't believe you. That it wouldn't happen. And like, you value memories a lot, don't you? And she says, well, not really, but now. And then Anthe says, stop that, Choo-Choo. And she's pointing to the camera. But then we see Choo-Choo hanging off the camera. Now, I do like that Anthe sticks. Anthe is so frustrating. And I know everybody's going to be like, I feel so bad for Anthe and everything she's gone through. And I do. We'll get to that. It's horrible. It's horrifying. But I'm also like, Anthe, you have a little bit of free will here. You're the witch. You're the witch. You have the free will here. Bitch slap Akio. But no, she won't do that because if he is her brother, she loves him. But at the same time, I'm like, there's a line. And if they're crossing the line, then you need to do something about it. So she keeps him from putting his arm around him, but then she doesn't do anything about him trying to sleep with her. So I'm like, Anthe, woman up. You're a witch, damn it. Use your powers. Anyway, so then we have Choo-Choo. And they're like, that ring also carries memories of your childhood, doesn't it? Now, I do like that Anthe gets in between them. Like, no. Anthe conveniently gets between them so that you could cut Akio out of the picture later if you wanted to. But, and she's like, yeah. Which, Akio got freaking huge if he grew up from being the prince, right? Because it looked like Anthe and the prince were younger when all this went down. He grew up really huge. The power of evil made him have a growth spurt. And she's like, I've been invited to a play after school. Shouldn't we all go? And that's what they do. So, and then Anthe says, I closed my eyes. Interesting. I don't know what to make about Anthe closing her eyes in the photo, but she tends to like avoid certain things or avoid the truth of things and like, you know, see no evil. Maybe it's tied to that. I love the arrows are back. The arrows leading them to the basement. Very, very Mikage. Very Nemuro Hall. Love it. And then we have the tail of the rose. I love that there's a little tiny stage. Nobody's in the audience except for our crew. And he's like, I haven't seen this play in ages. So has this play been shown before? Has this play been shown before to other people and Utena's not the first person to see it? And he's like, well, isn't this fun? And she's like, do you like plays, Akio? And he says, oh, well, you know, he quotes Shakespeare saying all the world's a stage. And then Anthe is like, and what does he say there? He says, you're either an actor or part of the audience. So it's like, clearly Akio wants to be an actor, but is Anthe the actress or part of the audience? I don't know. I get so tired of Anthe with the smile, and I'm like, girl, if you're gonna act, now's the time to do something. I do like the shadow girls and the satellite on the posters. That part is great. She's like, why did nobody else come? And then we have the shadow girls. So the light sealed away and the sad prince, the tale of the rose. And then when they say they still exist somewhere in this world, so you must beware. Well, that's indicating that Anthe and Akio are players that exist in this story still yet today. So the story takes place when all the girls in the world were princesses and the world had yet to fall completely into darkness. So basically before the patriarchy came about. Joking, of course. So basically all the world had princesses. And all of these princesses were rescued by a prince, which we will know as Dios. Now, I didn't think he was literally rescuing all the princesses, but the story makes it seem like he was rescuing all the princesses, and the idea of the prince became something that was relied upon. And it just overwhelmed him and exhausted him. And it's very fairy tale-like. I don't know what the real world metaphor is supposed to be, or if there is no real world metaphor, and it's literally just this is a fairy tale come to life. But the idea is that the power of the prince had protected all of these women over and over again to the point where it was just exhausting. And this is the reason there was a Rose Prince. So we have this like Godzilla. Now we have this whole thing. It's like a red-eyed monster that looks like Godzilla with a unicorn horn on it. I'm like, is that supposed to be Akio? Is it just a generic monster? But then we have the prince, right? We have this red-eyed monster with the horn on its head. And the prince comes in on his white horse, of course. And he says, well, thank you, Rose Prince. And he goes to give her a kiss, and then there's a monster that gets in the way. And every time he goes to kiss, it gets interrupted. The girls of the world were all princesses because we were always protected by the Rose Prince. And they said the world overflowed with light. But then it says, what's wrong, old woman? Calamity is taking over the world and plunging the world into darkness. And they say there's a witch. And then, of course, we go to Anthe, who is we're supposed to believe is the witch, right? Surely you know about it. The castle that floats in the sky, which seems like the castle that we've been looking at this entire time, is the witch's castle. Supposedly, the witch who lives there now is planning to steal the light from this world. And they're like, the light of the world. Yes. Do you know what that light is? And it's that which is eternal. And we see Saionji, that which shines. And we see Miki. And we said the power of miracles. So we see Juri. And then we said the power to bring revolution. And we see Toga. So basically the light that the prince brings, the light which is this idea of protection, is also this eternity. It is also something that is shining like a memory. It is the power of miracles. It is revolution. It's whatever they want to bring about, but it's basically just this power of, I would argue it's the power of oneself, right? And the prince had bestowed it upon, basically this prince had gone around giving these women the belief that he had to be there to protect them, when the answer is you need to protect yourself. That's the answer. That you hold the power of the revolution. You hold the power of all this. You don't need anybody else to give it to you. That's a big message of the story that they keep bashing us over the head with. And they're like, I'll defeat the witch and save the light of the world. Okay. So the prince flew to the castle in order to stop the witch and save the light. And they're on the horseback, so we're going to get them horses. Now, here's the thing. The OP leads us to believe that Anthe and Utena are on horseback to break into this castle and save the light. That makes me believe that Accio, if Accio is the prince, he separated himself from the light that is the prince. If it's the same being, and he's become evil over time, which we'll talk about. But, however, when they got to the castle, the story goes that the witch imprisoned him. You're the old woman. And they're like, no, this was a trap to steal you in the castle, and I'm your sister. And they have the hair that looks like Anthe. You're my little sister. Mm-hmm. Which, again, you talk about Accio and Toga, who have little sisters. Accio has Anthe, and Toga has Nanami. And the idea of the little sister. Now, in Nanami's case, her whole thing was that she didn't want Toga. She wanted to be Toga's sister because no matter who he dated, he would always have a special place in his heart for Nanami. And she would be considered special versus all of the other girls that he dated. And then when he told her and lied to her, saying that he wasn't her sister, her brother anymore, she didn't believe that she had the possibility of being special. That's not exactly the case with Anthe and Accio. It's a little bit different. But the story in the play is that Anthe trapped Dios in the castle. That's the play version, is that Anthe trapped Dios in the castle. And she says, yes, it's me. You are the prince who protects all the girls in this world. And the one who makes every girl in the world a princess. The Rose Prince. And then we see the light shine upon Accio, as if signifying that Accio is the Rose Prince. Which, we'll talk about that here in a second. So the light is suggesting that Accio is the Rose Prince. Okay. And then it says, but all I am is your little sister. I'm the one who you can't make a princess. And so Anthe is the witch, aka the Rose Bride. Which the play makes it seem, the irony is that the Anthe is the one that channels the power of Dios, but she can't become a princess because she's the sister and not one that he would save. So then she keeps spinning, and he's like, but even saying that is why I've become a witch. A girl who cannot become a princess is doomed to become a witch. This whole play was giving me Puella Magi Madoka Magica vibes. And I was like, oh, okay. Funny that. But then anyway, so the witch imprisoned the prince, according to the play, and the world fell into darkness. And then we see Accio, who is there looking like that Accio is, looking quite sinister in that moment. And the witch wanders our dark world even now. She searches for the young noble souls to sacrifice anew, and she seeks to keep another from bringing light into the world. So in the play, it says that she is sacrificing souls. That she's sacrificing souls and preventing a prince from existing. Now, the play, I don't believe is completely accurate. I believe that the play is a good example of how, like, rumors become myths, become legends, stories get twisted, and then they become this. Because a lot of that doesn't make sense. Like, why would Anthe not want girls to be special? Why would they not want that to be the case? That part doesn't quite make sense. And then it's like, well, but then how can Anthe access the power of Dios? And what does that have to do with the prince being in the castle stuck there? Why would she be helping someone get that power? The play doesn't quite add up, right? And so all darkness will reign. Beware, beware. Again, the play doesn't seem quite she's still somewhere in this world, which Anthe's right there. And they're like, you too, beware, must beware. The play makes it seem like Anthe is the enemy. And Anthe's the person we should avoid at all costs. Do I think that this play could have been commissioned by Akio because Akio would really like Utena to stay away from Anthe? Which, again, that is part of the story that is a little confusing at this point, because it seemed like Akio was like, oh, well, I want Utena to free Dios, so it will be he said in episode 13 it would be advantageous to both of us. And so it's like, well, why would you not want Utena to be with Anthe unless you're realizing that she might not need you anymore and she could run off with Utena, with Anthe herself, and not need you, and then you wouldn't get the power. Maybe, I don't know. This series in some regards keeps flitting around the truth, and I'm like, I wish it would just get to the point. I wish it would just cut through the bullshit. They're like skating around everything and giving us chunks, and I'm like, I'm ready for the information. Let's go. But the series is not going to just give it to us because why would it? So then we have Toga practicing kendo, and Saionji's practicing and sparring with him, and he's like, I want to fight, and I have a match coming up. I'm like, are we going back to the duels? And he says the fact that Utena continues to win, even without the Sword of Dios appearing, is causing some concern. So there is this concern that Utena is not accessing the power of Dios anymore. Which I guess Akio could be concerned about that, because if Utena was accessing the power of Dios, my thought was, way back in episode 13, that Akio wanted whatever power the prince had, which we now know is the power of Dios, and Akio wanted it for himself. Which, here's the rub of it all. Do I think that there is a chance that Akio has the power of Dios, which is the prince we saw hanging out on the egg in the castle, is that princeliness of Akio. And Anthe sealed it away out of love, which we'll talk about in a second when we get the other flashback. She sealed it away to protect him and keep him from being used. And she sacrificed herself to do that, which again, we'll talk about here in a second in more detail. But it's been locked away. And Akio, who is this power unchecked, and we'll talk about all of that, he wants that power back. So the prince is Akio's inner prince. It is a persona of himself that's been locked away, and he wants access to that. But Akio had thought that Utena would allow him to access Dio and get that power back and take it away from Anthe, and to unseal it as Anthe had sealed it away. Now, I think what Akio is worried about, and what Toga is projecting, is that Utena may be on the cusp of realizing she doesn't need to break the prince from the castle. She is her own prince, in a sense. She is her own power to protect someone, and her own power to love someone, and to do what Dios did for others. Utena's like, I don't need you to do that. I can do that myself. I don't need a prince. I can be my own prince. And I feel like because Utena's not been using the Sword of Dios, that's the concern, is that Utena, because of her love of Anthe, because she loves Anthe, and she just hasn't come to the full lesbian realization of it yet, which, dear God, girl, get it by now, please. I feel like Utena's on the cusp of realizing her love for Anthe, and that it's more than friendship, that it's beyond that. And if she does that, then she's not going to need Akio or Dios anymore. And they don't want that, because that would defeat the purpose of having a prince, right? So Toga's like, I'm going to have to duel her. So Toga's going to duel her at some point again. And Saionji's like, why? Why do we always lose to that girl? And it's like, she's no ordinary girl. When she was a child, she was shown something eternal. So like back in the day, she was shown the power of Dios. And Toga believes that's what makes Utena special, is that she was shown the power of Dios. That's what makes her special. I would argue what makes her special is her genuine love of Anthe and her compassion for her. But whatever. I feel like Saionji's probably onto it more than Toga is. But Toga wants to realize what that was with his child long nails. And like, was that girl her? And then we get the Shadow Girls cheersing their play, going success. Their play today went perfectly. The joys of being an actress. Even that in itself, the joys of being an actress, tells me that there's parts of the story that are either fabricated or not completely told truthfully. Because then they have the other sister come in. And they're like, yes, big brother, the light sealed away, the sad prince. The tale of the rose, now in its greatest telling. And like, she's talented, but a little weird. You don't have many friends, do you? You're one to talk. Definitely no friends. So, it is very frustrating for a lot of reasons at this point in the story. Because Anthe, you got in the middle of the picture, but you're not going to do anything about this. You're not going to do anything about your brother trying to mac up on Utena. You're not going to do a thing about it when they're sitting on the couch together. Really? You're just going to leave? You're going to leave? And then Utena's like, and I like Utena's like, are you going to sleep already? Like, that's not, and then Anthe just leaves in the elevator. And Utena seems like she has a little blush on her face like, well, why are you going? I do appreciate that this show is subtle. I wish it wasn't so subtle sometimes in Utena's retaliation. I wish that as unsubtle as this series can be, as it was last week, there are parts of me that wish that it would be a little bit less subtle with Utena figuring out that she wants and cares for Anthe. That'd be great. I'd love that. That'd be wonderful. But Utena is just, not there yet. And so then, Utena's like, well, what do you think of the play? And he's like, well, it's what I'd expect from students. And she's like, from students? Like, he was a little bit cold there. So he gives her the tea and everything. And then he says, it must be hard. And she's like, him and Mia. And he tries to make, like, Akio wants to make Utena not want to be friends with Anthe. He tries to, like, turn Anthe against him and Mia. Or turn Utena against him and Mia. Because I think that that's the last thing. If he can get Utena to drop Anthe as a friend, then he'll have total control over her. And I feel like part of Akio's thing is that there's the former shell of the prince inside of him that's become twisted, which we'll talk about in a second, and I'm a little frustrated with it. But he's like, well, but I'm the person that you need, right? And there's like a lot of insecurity masked into it, but it's, I can't feel sorry for you for what you're doing because you're an asshole. And then a part of me is like, is this really the prince that's just transformed into this? And he's like, what is a friend to you? And she's like, well, it's someone who's important to me. And then he says, well, what about us? And he's like, are we friends? And he's like, you always wear this ring. And she's like, well, because the prince gave it to me. Which leads me to believe she doesn't think Akio is the prince. But if you don't think he's the prince, then what are we doing? And he's like, well, I recall you didn't even take it off that night. And he almost like turns her like she's going to kiss him. But then she says no. And he's like, is it your duty to your prince? And she's like, I think I want to be true to him. And I'm like, girl, just admit that you like Anthe. I'm like, are we really going to skate around this forever? Are we going to? I think that I really wish Utena would make even a subtle jump. And I know she kind of is to admitting that she likes Anthe, but she keeps on saying it's the prince. And I wish that she would move a little faster. I wish she would get away from it. She's like, when I look at this, I remember. She's like, he told me to never lose my nobility. Which again, she had that moment with Akio last episode. So when she talks about losing her nobility, I wish she would bring it up and like move away from him. Which I guess nothing happens between them because she ends up leaving and getting back in bed with Anthe. So I guess nothing happened. And then we see Anthe with her hair down looking sad. And we have Chuchi with the eye mask. And she's like, I don't remember much from that time. And he's like, that time? And he's like, what time was that? Now, see, at that point, I'm like, if Akio is actually the prince, if he is the prince that talked to Utena all those times ago, then why does he act like he doesn't remember? Why is he an asshole? And why is he an asshole? Why does he act like he doesn't remember? And why is he the way that he is? So there's part of me that wants to think the prince, Dios, and Akio are two separate people. That they're not the same person. Because, I don't know, it just doesn't make sense for them to be the same people the way that he phrases it to her. right? Because he keeps looking at her like she's going to remember something. And she's like, I don't really remember. And I'm like, well, why don't you really remember? And then it's like, is it a trauma response because of what happened in the coffin and what she saw? But then it's like, if it's a trauma response, but you love Anthe, we get to see her memories that she doesn't even remember. And then we see the two of them looking in the coffin at her, and there's the lightning. So she remembers that somewhat. But the thing of it is, Toga and Saionji find her, but then we see her in the coffin that looks like a heart, you know. But then she's on just a bed of roses, not in the coffin, and that's when the prince comes to see her. And he's like, what are you doing? And she says, nothing. And then she asks if he's deaf, and he's like, no, I don't serve death. And she says, you're pretty. So he takes her to the end of this road, the end of this like red carpet, and she jumps over to where this massive, like basically where Anthe is speared with swords into the wall, and it looks like a broken rose petal. Like, it's very symbolic, looks like a broken rose. And then she has like, I like that Utena's childlike funeral dress has the black ties, but it looks like a little black dress, and he says it's a witch. Now, the prince, she looks very young at this point, and the prince looks very young. And she's like, a witch, and he says, the Rose Bride. Those who can die are lucky. And then we see her, and she's been tortured. She cannot die. She lives on in agony. And they're like, but why? And they say it's her punishment for taking the prince away from the girls of the world. So in this thing, we have Dios. Or is it actually Dios? Is it Accio? Is it just the spirit? Is this all a false memory? Who knows? But saying that Anthe has to suffer. Anthe has to suffer for taking Dios from protecting the girls of the world. Okay. For taking the prince away, which we'll talk about that here in a second. And so then we see the prince there, and I don't know if this is supposed to be young Accio, maybe, but it says they tell the story even now. The tale of the rose. So then we have the scene from the cat in the cabin. The thing of it is, there's a fax machine, and they're in the barn. The barn is the same barn that Nanami's flashback was, or Nanami's dream was, where she was the cow and Toga was taking her off to sail. Which, honestly, now, the idea of Toga taking Anthe off to slaughter, or taking Nanami off to slaughter, is kind of like what ends up happening to Anthe. Anthe ends up taking charge and responsibility and gets punished. Kind of like Anthe getting taken off to slaughter by her brother. That's kind of what happens here in a sense. But I don't know if the fax machine is supposed to tell us that this barn is fabricated and this happened during real time, or if the fax... I don't know why the fax machine is there. It's weird. It's like a bizarre David Lynchian thing to happen. But anyway, the prince says all these people come to find him. And it's a bunch of... they're all... Well, there's some women there maybe, but they're mostly men. And the men are asking the prince to go fight for their daughters. So it's just all these people asking him to fight. And Dios is just... He's like, you're the only one that can save my daughter. And he's just exhausted. So it's kind of like... It's almost a parody in a way. Because he's like, I've been fighting all... Like, it's like he's literally been fighting thousands of monsters to save the girls. And be this figure that's just a prince, but he's not something real. And his shirt is torn open, which leads me to think it's like Accio when his shirt is torn open. But I'm like... And so he's hurt, and she tells him not to move. And he's like, well, I have to go. They're calling for my help. And then she... I don't like the way they sexualize her as a child. Like, she's supposed to be a preteen, and they sexualize her by almost showing her boobs. I don't like it. It's gross. I really don't like it. I'm like, she's supposed to be a kid. And she lays him down. And she tells him not to fight anymore or he'll die. And then she like lays down beside him. I don't know why it's so sexual. Why does it have to be? And they're like, please help our daughters and fight. But then when the door opens up, For a brief second, her dress looks black and her hair looks pink. And I thought it was Utena when the door opened up. And it was really weird. But yeah, it's all these men with swords asking him to come and save their daughter. Yeah, they're all men. Well, there's some women there. Never mind. There's some women there in the crowd. They're all parents. And she says, Dios is not here anymore. He belongs to me alone now. Which she's wearing, like, she looks sexualized. She has, like, the low-cut dress. And it's very skimpy. And it's to make her look, you know, more mature than she probably is. And she says, he belongs to me. I've sealed him away where you can never touch him again. Which I'm like, if they just pushed past her and opened the door, they'd find him. Unless this is just a metaphor and it's supposed to be the castle. And so then that's when they all get mad at her. And they're like, what have you done? They call her a witch. And then as he calls out her name, they skew her with the swords. Which again, you look in this thing of the swords skewering her, which is a horrifying imagery. But I mean, how many times have the swords been taken out of her? How many times have the swords of Dios been taken out of her as like penance for it? My thing is, so what she did was she sacrificed herself. So in reality, Anthe has to suffer because she basically kept Dios alive and she sacrificed herself and took all of the hatred upon herself. Which throughout the series, Anthe has been hated by all of the characters. They've all directed their anger towards her. They've all gotten mad at her at different times. She's been the butt of a lot of the bullying, has been Anthe since the very beginning of the series. And it was really through Utena and her compassion and love that started to recede a little bit. But I don't know if I like the message of, I mean, I get the message of you shouldn't take on the hatred of everybody else for someone. I get that message. I think that it's horrifying and tragic that Anthe has taken on the pain and suffering on behalf of her brother to keep him safe. But I'm like, you shouldn't have to do that. And I think that's the point, is Utena being like, you should not have had to do that. Your brother should have just said no or stood up for himself, and you shouldn't have had to do that. She sacrificed herself to save her beloved prince because she loved her brother. But she shouldn't have had to do that. That's the point. You should not have to sacrifice yourself for anybody, even though she was the only one who truly loved him. Because they're siblings, right? So then she runs over and she says, and yet the prince she loves is no longer the prince that she knew. This is the part that frustrates me a little bit. Like, if the prince became Accio because she kept him from going and protecting girls, why is it that her sacrificing herself and taking on the other people's hatred, I could understand if her taking on the hatred of others and sacrificing herself kept him up in the castle and kept his love and the prince that she knew. If that was the case and the prince that she knew was just an actual being and he was stuck in the castle and she took it on and did all that, I get it. That would make sense to me and that would be fine. But if you're telling me that because she sacrificed herself and kept her brother from exhausting himself to death, that he became a raping asshole, why? I'm like, why does that make sense? I'm like, he's like, not anymore. And so he says he's now the end of the world. Why did we become that? Why did her keeping him from killing himself make him an asshole that assaults people? Because what it does is it makes it sound like he's somebody to be pitied. And I'm like, no, you didn't have to become that. If anything, you should be trying to save your sister, not use her and abuse her. What the fuck? So I'm like, that part of it is just so weird to me. And I don't know. It reminds me of, there is a character in Berserk, and I'm not going to get into Berserk spoilers, but there's a character in Berserk that is an absolute asshole. But there's a part of the story that the writers do that makes you go, you're not trying to redeem this character, are you? And everybody in the comments are like, no, that's not it. That's not what they're trying to do. And I'm like, are you sure? Because it seems like they might be. And so I'm like, if you try to tell me that poor Akio, because Anthe sacrificed herself, got speared with thousands of swords, and because she defended him, because of her actions, he's like, oh, I couldn't help but become an asshole. That's bullshit. And I'm like, I hope that's not what they're trying to suggest, that he's the end of the world now. And she's like, well, this is horrible. It feels like there's something missing. It feels like there's something missing. Because it makes no sense to me for Akio to be like, well, because Anthe wouldn't let me go out and protect women, I guess I'll just assault them. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. No, none of that makes sense at all. Because then it says all she has left is her suffering. I'm like, this story doesn't make sense. Stop it. Something's missing. Or it should be missing. And I feel bad. I don't ever want to see Anthe crying like this. Little kid Utena crying is so sad. And for Anthe suffering. And that's when Utena's like, well, help her. And she's like, why won't you help her? And she's like, this poor girl. And she's crying for her. And she's like, won't you help her, please? And the prince, who's right there, says, well, I can't do that because the story. And then he wipes her tears away. So I don't know if he was just showing her, like, the story. Is Anthe trapped up in the castle? Is the prince on the egg actually Anthe? Who knows? And then he suddenly looks a lot bigger. He's like, she's beyond my help now. I'm like, why? Why is she beyond your help? Again, makes no sense. None of that makes sense. No. I was like, why is she beyond your help? The only one who can save her now is a prince she can believe in. And so she's like, well, you're a prince, aren't you? And he's like, I can't become her prince. Why the fuck not? And she's like, yeah, why not? And then he doesn't answer the question. So it's so, I am sorry. I am sure these questions are going to be answered by the time we get done with this series. But I'm like, you're a prince. Why do you have to become an asshole? Because your sister's suffering. I don't understand why. Doesn't make sense. Why don't you save her? Why don't you do that? And then he's like, oh, you're a gentle-hearted girl. Thank you for your tears. I'm like, that didn't answer the question, asshole. So something is missing. It better be missing. Because this shit don't add up. This don't make no sense. Because, yeah. And then he's like, And then he goes up to her. And she's like, what the fudge? And then she's like, well, then I'll become a prince. And I'll save her if you won't do it. And she's like, I'll become her prince and I'll save her. And then he just looks back at her and is like, well, if you never lose your nobility, even when you grow up, then you may be able to save her from eternal torment. Now, the question is, her losing her nobility, I mean, clearly her and Akio having this tryst has not stopped her nobility, I guess. We guess. But it's weird because on the one hand, Dios seems to be in this moment asking her to save Anthe, but then Akio is actively trying to keep her from doing that. So what the fudge show? It just feels like there's a disconnect there. Something is missing. And I can't quite tell what is missing. Because then he gives her the ring and it's a little too big on her hand. And she's like, I'm sure you will forget all of what you've seen tonight. But even if you do remember this, you're a girl. And she's like, oh, I swear I'll become a prince. He's like, what? As if girls could like girls. But yeah, and he seems, he's like, if so, the ring will lead you back here one day. To her. And then Anthe's like, okay. And then Utena's like, okay. And then we see the spotlight on her. So then she's back. And she's like, I feel like I was dreaming about something familiar and I can't remember now. Which is so freaking frustrating. I'm like, how could you not remember it? She's like, I was looking at your face as you slept. And then Anthe says, who are you? What's this who are you business? What is this nonsense? What is this bullshit? What is this bullshit? I feel like there is a piece of the puzzle, a piece of the story that's not being told, that is not being shown to us. and I want to know what it is. So I definitely want to watch the next episode and see what's going on. But I don't understand what it could be. There needs to be something, right? There needs to be something. I don't know. I just want Utena. I liked the fact of this flashback that we saw Utena have such conviction to want to save Anthe. I just need Utena to remember that conviction and remember the flashback so she can, do that. So Utena's lack of memorizing and remembering things is highly frustrating. Highly frustrating. And so and I don't know if her wearing the ring allows Akio to make her forget. The connection between the prince and Akio for me right now, writing wise, is really weak. And I expect better from this show. So I feel like there's something missing, because as it is right now, I'm like, that don't make no sense. I'm like, bullshit. I call bullshit. So there either is something missing or the writing is not up to par with what I expect it to be, and I expect it to be better. So I feel like there's something missing, and we've just got to find out what that is. So, okay. Because I'm like, if something is rotten in the state of Denmark, and I want to know what it is exactly. So I guess we'll see in episode 35. I guess we'll see. Anyway. I'm sure that what I've said is very frustrating to some of you that have seen the whole series and know it as a whole, but please understand that I am likely to change my mind. I am likely to revisit my thoughts and change my feelings, but I'm just going to be 100 with y'all week to week until I figure out more. Please, no spoilers. So, in the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah, I'll be back very soon with more Revolutionary Girl Utena. Bye.